friends, it's Laurie. Thanks for stopping by, and let's go make some gnomes. I'm starting my first gnome by using a woman's cotton ankle sock along with 2 jars of the vanilla bath salts, and these all came from the Dollar Tree. The easiest way to fill your sock is to slide it over the mouth of the jar. And each of these are 17.6 ounces, and I like to use about 1.5. When I'm done, I just kind of wiggle around the salt in the sock, and then I tie off the end with a rubber band. To cover my gnome's body, I found this cute 2-pack of socks at the Dollar Tree, and I'm using one of the striped ones to cover over my white sock. Then, using my scissors, I'm cutting down the end of my white sock, and I'm just tying it into a knot. All this does is just help the elastic band keep everything in place. To make my beard for the gnome, I'm using one of these multicolor pom-pom keychains. They're from the Dollar Tree, and I'm removing the hanger, and then using my scissors, there's a thread inside that's kind of holding it all together. I just cut that away, and then I open up the pom. Before I attach my beard to the gnome, I'm using my scissors to kind of even off the sides, and I'm giving it a semi-rounded shape. When I'm done, I'm adding some hot glue, and I'm making sure not to add some at the very top because this is where I'll be tucking in my nose. To give my gnome some arms, I'm using the other matching sock, and I'm cutting it right down the center. I now have 2 pieces, and I'm folding one in half, and I'm measuring it against my gnome to decide about how long I want my arms to be. Once I'm done, I then cut them both to size. I'm folding my socks inside out, and I'm matching up the 2 sides. I'm then using my glue gun, and I'm sealing the 2 sides together. I'm adding some arms onto my gnome, but this step is completely optional. Once they're all glued together, I then turn each of them inside out. I'm then adding a dot of glue to the closed end, and I'm attaching them both together. I'm then centering my hands in the middle of the beard, and I'm hot gluing an arm to each side. To make the nose for my gnome, I'm using one of these table tennis balls from the Dollar Tree, but you can always use a plastic ornament, or you can even use one of these wooden knobs. For my nose color, I'm using this pretty coral acrylic paint. To help keep my hands a little cleaner, I just poke a hole in the back of the ball, slide in a skewer, and then give it a good coat of paint. When my nose is dry, I'm adding some hot glue onto the body and attaching the nose. Once it's attached in place, I'm then hot gluing the sides of the beard up and around the nose and onto the body. With that complete, and to make the horn for my unicorn, I'm using one of these unicorn skirts, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I'm removing the stitching from the waistband and on the back seam so that I end up having one long piece of fabric. I'm then folding it in half and matching up my 2 ends, and then cutting it on the fold. There are some imperfections in the fabric, so I folded over the long ends, and then using my iron, I gave each of them a seam. To add my 2 pieces of fabric together, I just placed the top piece over the bottom, and then using my glue gun, I attached them both together. I turned my fabric over, and I placed one corner into the center, and then I met it with the other corner. When I was done, I then attached both pieces together. With my hat all put together, I'm now using some polyfill, and I'm going to stuff the end. Now that it's stuffed, and to make the horn, I'm folding one side into the center, and I'm attaching it with my glue gun. When my first side is attached, I'm then doing the same with my second, And once again, I'm folding it into the center and attaching it with my hot glue. With my first two pieces attached, I'm then working my way up and continuing to gather and hot glue the fabric together until I come to a point. Now that my hat's all glued together and you can see I have the seam in the back, I'm now going to slide it over the top of my gnome. I'm placing a line of hot glue on the nose and then I'm attaching the bottom of the hat. With my nose in place, I now pulled the sides of the fabric down and attached it, making sure that I covered where I had placed the arms. When I was done, I added a little more filling around the nose just to kind of fill out that area on the hat. With my hat in place, I'm once again gathering the fabric on the back and I'm pulling it as tight as possible. And once again, I'm hot gluing the fabric together and I'm making another seam. When I'm done, my fabric has been pulled together tightly and I have my seam on the back. To wrap my horn, I'm going to be using some clear fishing line, but if you don't have any of this on hand, you can always use some dental floss or some rubber bands. I cut a long piece of fishing line and then I tied it around about 3/4 of the way down on my hat. I tied about 3 or 4 knots in my fishing line. I then started wrapping the line tightly around the fabric and turning it into a point. When I came to the end, I once again tied off my fishing line with 3 or 4 knots. With my unicorn horn complete, I want to give my gnome a flower laurel. For my base, I'm using 6 chenille stems and I'm going to wrap them together in 3s. I found the measurement for my gnome's head and then I wrapped my stems into a circle. I'm using an assortment of leftover flowers and leaves that I've had on hand, and all I'm doing is just starting to randomly glue them around the circle. As I'm adding them on, I don't have any special placement or pattern. I'm just kind of gluing them on here and there to fill around the ring. When my laurel is finally complete, I then place it over my unicorn gnome's head. To give my gnome some feet, I'm using one of these chalkboard tags from the Dollar Tree and I'm painting it the same color coral as I did his nose. I added on some hot glue and then placed my gnome right on top. I gave him a little mustache and with that, my unicorn gnome is complete. To start my second DIY, I'm using an ankle sock from the Dollar Tree along with another jar of bath salts. Once my sock is filled, I'm then tying the top off once again with a rubber band. To make the beard for this gnome, I'm using some strands from a Dollar Tree mop head. I like a full beard, so I cut away 16 strands, but you can make your beard any size you'd like. When I was done, I lined them all up. To hold my beard together, I placed a line of glue through the center of my strands and then placed a chenille stem right on top of the glue. Once I was done, I then folded the mop strands from one side over the chenille stem and onto the other. I then cut 5 more of the mop head strands. This time I placed a line of hot glue just beyond the chenille stem and then attached my strands. My idea is to make a flower child gnome or a hippie, and I'm hoping this will end up being his long goatee. With everything attached, I'm now unraveling my gnome's beard. Once I'm done, I'm then giving the gnome's beard a trim, and I didn't unravel the 5 long pieces because I didn't want to accidentally cut them in the process. While I was shaping it, I just used my scissors and I kind of cut shorter on the sides and left it longer on the bottom. When I was done, I then unraveled my 5 long strands. And I'm just leaving them as is until after I attach the beard. Attaching the beard is super easy. I cut off the excess chenille stems. I decided about where I wanted my beard to be, and I just placed it against the gnome's body. I painted a yellow table tennis ball just like I did in my last video, and I attached it onto the gnome's body with some hot glue. I then used some hot glue to attach the beard permanently in place. I tucked it up under the nose, and then I attached the 2 pieces to the sides. I'm going to be braiding my long pieces, so I took a rubber band and I wrapped it up just about where the beard begins. And then I separated my strands into 3 equal sections. Then I just braided them together. When I was done, I wrapped a rubber band around the bottom to hold my braid in place, and then I snipped away the one that was in the beard. I made a simple bow from some ribbon that matched my hat, and this also came from the Dollar Tree. When I was done, I added a dot of hot glue and I attached it over the yellow band. For the gnome's hat, I'm using one of these striped socks from the Dollar Tree, and I'm stuffing it with some polyfill. You can make your hat any size you'd like. I'm going to stuff mine to just about the heel. Once I'm done, I then slide it over the top of the gnome. I then add a line of glue along the top of the nose and then pull my hat right down on top of it. Once it's set up and in place, I then pull the sides down and attach those to the gnome's body. I then finished up attaching it to the back. To embellish the hat, I cut 4 long thin ribbons and I'm just tying them around the top. I'm then using some pip berries from the Dollar Tree and I'm just wrapping a few strands around the middle of the hat. These are the things I'm adding onto my gnome, but you can add on anything you like and personalize it your own way. I'm using 2 flower pots for this project. I painted one from the Dollar Tree a pretty yellow, and this small one I found at Michael's. I painted this one white. When they were dry, and to give them a little accent, I used the 3 colors, the yellow, the aqua, and the white, and I added some random dots on each of them. I used the back of my paintbrush, I placed it in the paint, and then I made some dots. When I was done adding my dots to the pots, I then added some yellow dots onto my bow. I'm attaching the little flower pot to the front of my gnome's hat. What's a flower pot without some flowers? So using my hot glue gun, I attached a little piece of Sahara inside. I'm using some of the same little flowers that I used in my first project. They're just random and I've had them left over. I'm cutting off the stems and I'm just placing them inside of the pot. When I was done, I had this cute little flower pot full of flowers. I then added some hot glue onto my hat and just placed the flower pot into it. To finish up, I placed my gnome in the flower pot, and then using some of those same random flowers, I just tucked them all around him. I added 3 yellow flowers to his beard. I tied off my top ribbons into a bow. I added a yellow sprig of flowers, and with that, my flower child gnome is complete. To To start my third project, I'm using the bottom half of one of the round gift boxes from the Dollar Tree. I also found these cool socks there, and I'm using one of these to cover the gift box. I placed the sock over the bottom, leaving the top open. You'll need something to weigh down the box. I'm using these leftover glass beads, but you can use some rocks or some rice or anything that you have on hand. When I was done adding my beads, I then tied off the top with an elastic band. For my gnome's beard, I'm using this black palm that came from the Dollar Tree, and just like my first project, I'm removing the hanger, I'm cutting the insides, and I'm flattening out the fabric. I'm using my scissors to snip off any of the imperfections, and then I'm cutting it into a rounded beard shape. To attach the beard, I'm placing some hot glue on the back, and I'm making sure to leave a little space at the top so I can place on my nose, and then I'm just pressing it against the body. I painted a white nose just like I did in my other two projects, and using my glue gun, I placed a little bit just under the beard and then popped my nose into place. To turn my gnome into a ladybug, I'm using a ladybug skirt and headband from the Dollar Tree. I removed the antennae and the wings from my headband, and then I hot glued a wing on each side of my gnome. I want to end up with two pieces of fabric just like my first project, so I'm once again taking apart the waistband and the seam on my ladybug skirt. And just like my first project, I'm folding my fabric in half, I'm meeting the two ends, and I'm cutting on the fold. I'm folding over the ends of my fabric and I'm attaching them together using my glue gun. Once my two pieces of fabric are attached, I'm folding it in half with the seam in the middle, and then I'm attaching the two ends. When I'm done, I'm then folding the fabric over on the two sides, and I'm giving them a hem as well. I'm using my glue gun to attach all my pieces of fabric together, but if you have a sewing machine, that would be a great option too. To give my hat some height, I'm using this tall wired stem. I had it left over from some silk flowers. If you don't have something like this on hand, you can always use a coat hanger. I slipped my wire in between the rubber band, and then I used some hot glue to help hold it in place. To help fill up the top of my hat, I'm using some recycled polyfill, and I'm just hot gluing it around the top of my gnome. I'm using one of the open ends in my fabric to place on the gnome's hat. Once I have the hat on, I'm kind of holding it up a bit while I'm placing my hot glue on the nose, and then I'm just sliding the fabric down to attach it. I'm then adding some hot glue behind the wings and then tucking my fabric down and attaching it. To fill in the area above the nose, I tucked in a little extra polyfill. Now, just like my unicorn gnome, I'm folding over the fabric and I'm pulling it tightly, and then I'm hot gluing it into place. I'm just continuing to pull the fabric tight and hot glue it into place, and when I'm done, I'll have a seam up the back of my hat. When I was done on the back, I then moved to the front of the hat and I gathered the excess fabric near the top. I folded it over and I began hot gluing it, making a seam just like I had in the back, but this time I followed around my wire. When I was finished, my fabric was completely wrapped around my gnome. I'm using two daisies that I had on hand. I'm removing the centers and I'm placing my antennae, one in each of them. I then added a little hot glue on the back to hold them in place. I decided where I wanted to place them and used my scissors to poke a hole. I then used a little hot glue to help hold them in place. I'm adding a bow to my gnome and I'm actually recycling it off of this old dress. I was so happy when I found it because it actually has a little ladybug on it. I then used my glue gun and I hot glued it to the top of my hat. I also added on an extra daisy accent. I painted another chalkboard tag white, added some hot glue, and attached my gnome to it. When I was done and to finish up, I added some of these 3D Ladybug stickers that I found at Michael's. And with that, my Dollar Tree Ladybug gnome is complete. Thanks so much for making it to the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed making these gnomes with me. If you're new and you haven't yet subscribed and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. I hope you have an awesome day and I will see you soon. Bye, everybody.